the word purity is only used twice in the Bible, at least for using the King James version. Um, and I did look at some other things. I looked at pure. I looked at sexual. If you're talking about sexual purity, you're talking about fornication and and those kinds of things. But it's interesting to note that the word pure is word used 97 times in the Bible in 93 verses. And in the Old Testament, it's almost exclusively used in terms of the purity of gold and also of incense, frankincense. And if you're looking at the purity of gold, the thing is when you have pure gold, the gold that we see in jewelry is not really pure gold. 22 karat means pure gold is 24 karat. 24 parts out of 24 parts are gold. But pure gold is very soft. In fact, you can beat it out and make it super thin. You can have 100,000 leaves of gold would make about a centimeter of thickness. So it's not really useful to God and as far as purity unless it can withstand the purification process. And so that's an important property of gold, and that it's malleable, that it's that can conform to the will of God. And I think that's the illustration there. But let's look at a couple of verses of purity. The first one was in 1 Timothy 4:12. Let no man despise thy youth, but be thou an example of the believers in word and conversation, in charity, in spirit, in faith, and in purity. And 1 Timothy 5:1-2, rebuke not an elder, but entreat him as a father, and the younger men as brethren, the elder women as mothers, the younger sisters with all purity. So if you look how the word pure is used through the Bible, in the Old Testament, it talks about the purity of gold. And we talked about how those properties being conformed to the God, withstanding adversity. That's the picture of purity. Then if you start looking in the book of Job, Job 8:6 says, if thou wert pure and upright, surely now he would awake for thee and make the habitation of righteousness prosperous. So basically, purity is making a habitation for the Holy Spirit. So it's a purity of the heart. For thou hast said, my doctrine is pure, and I am clean in thy eyes. Job 11:4. So basically, making ourselves presentable to God. So first, again, making a habitation for the Holy Spirit, making us presentable to God. And then finally, the topaz of Ethiopia shall not equal it, neither shall it be valued with pure gold. Talking about, and here they're talking about pure gold equating with wisdom. But it's not until the New Testament that we talk about sexual purity. And it's interesting to note that a lot of these things here in 1 Timothy 5:22, laying hands suddenly on no man, neither be a partaker of other men's sins. Keep thyself pure. And 2 Timothy 2:22, flee also youthful lusts, but follow righteousness, faith, charity, peace with all them that call on the Lord out of a pure heart. So again, here you're talking about a pure heart and keeping thyself pure. So these are all things that are very important to the Lord. And so it's not just sexual purity. It starts with looking at the purity of God and then keeping ourselves pure. So and then there's a lot of verses on talking about fornication, but most of those are going to be in the New Testament. So I think that's kind of a good starting point here. But the way the topic is addressed in the Bible is that it first starts from the inside and then its outward manifestation. So purity, as far as sexual purity, seems to be in the New Testament almost an end result. It's coming from the inside out, where most of the time purity is talking about the outside in. So I guess that's kind of how I'd like to just start it out. But I'd like to hear what some other thoughts that people have.
Thank you so much. The last point, I still want to get it clear. You said purity starts from the inside and outward, or I don't think I get that one correctly.
Well, if um, in the Old Testament, basically, where the Bible is talking about impurity, is more of um, it was a corporate thing. It talked about Israel and the people of God being impure with other nations and the contamination of other nations. So here you're talking about going from a corporate thing from the people of God into being more of a personal thing. I think that's kind of where I'm driving at right now. It has to do with the circumcision of the heart as well, and the outward manifestation of that is an impure life. So
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so very much. So please, doctor, can you please give us like a few hints on how can people stay pure? You make mention of other purity apart from sexual purity. What is the starting point of the sexual impurity, and how can we avoid that one?
I'm not sure that I'm an expert in these things. You ministers are probably more of an expert than I am. In fact, if you look at the medical community, and uh, the medical community tends to insulate ourselves from God, the consequences of sin. In other words, if you get a sexually transmitted disease, we have a cure for that. Where in the past, these things would last for a long time, and they would have some very dire consequences. So, in some aspects, the medical community kind of works against that concept of purity. And if you look at um, the history of psychiatry, the one of the mainstays of that with Freud was that uh, guilt causes a lot of psychological problems. Guilt can cause depression. Guilt can cause give you ulcers in your stomach. So there's a lot of physical consequences of this feeling of guilt. Now, God, I believe, uses guilt as kind of a something to wake people up, and it's like pain. If you have your hand over a fire, pain can actually be a very good thing in that it tells you get your hand out of the fire. Now
Yeah.
you can either look at it that way, or you could say, uh, and I think one of the downsides of modern medicine is that we want to get rid of that pain. There's a couple ways of getting rid of that pain. The most logical way would be get your hand out of the fire. The other way of handling pain is, well, take some medicine, some painkillers, and get rid of the pain that way. Uh, Now, obviously, that's not a very smart thing to do because then your hand gets severely burned. Um, and there are some medical conditions like that, like diabetes, where you can't sense pain, and uh, uh, even like leprosy. And so uh, the wrong way to handle diabetes would be to just cover up the pain and not look at your feet, inspect your feet to see if there's any injuries. Um, but guilt is in the same line of that thinking. There's a couple ways you can handle guilt. You could say, okay, what is this guilty thing feeling? It's not making me feel good. So either we can get rid of the cause of the guilt, which is sinful behavior, or we can get rid of the concept of guilt. We could say guilt is bad. And so let's try not to make people guilty. And oftentimes in the media, you'll hear people say, well, I don't feel safe. And that's a way of shutting you down as a pastor, saying, don't make me feel guilty. But what they're really saying is, I don't like you helping to awake this feeling of guilt in me. And so uh, stop doing that. Stop making me feel guilty. Whereas God's way would be get rid of the behavior that causes guilt. So, getting, I think the way to handle sexual sin is also can also follow in that line of thinking. In that the you can either get rid of the guilt of that sexual sin uh, by just getting rid of people that make you feel guilty, or you can get rid of the behavior. So what I think pastors are up against these days, especially in the modern world, there's this very strong push to get rid of this feeling of guilt, and for you to be quiet. But in reality, it's very destructive. It's like putting that hand over the fire and giving some people pain pills. It may make them feel better, but it's actually very destructive. And in the same way, having sexual behavior normalized and saying it's not a big deal, the guilt is what's the problem. That's also very destructive, because we know things like people that are living sexually impure lifestyles. It's a self-destructive behavior, and so yeah, you have higher divorce, higher drug use, alcohol use, having children in a relationship that is morally impure, usually due to things like divorce, and instability in the house leads to more children being abused by boyfriends. It may be the mother's second or third boyfriend, so there's going to be sexual abuse of the children. And then, you're getting into sins of the third and fourth generations very quickly. I think we just have to, as medical people, and this is medicine is a ministry, and being pastors is a ministry. We can't be afraid of looking and saying, people say that they may feel guilty, and stop making me feel guilty. You're doing a bad thing. But in reality, you're taking that person's hand out of the fire and saying, look, you're injuring yourself. This is not good for you. It's not good for your family. It's not good in honoring God. And we can't be ashamed of that.
Yeah. Thank you. Doctor, you're really doing a very amazing job. We keep hearing more of this when counseling young people, most especially about pornography and about fornication, that most of them try to say it is health conditions, which I believe they are not giving us the truth aspect of it. They say it's a health condition, it's a medical whatever. If they did not do it, it will affect them somehow. Is there any medical requirement for masturbation? Is there any medical requirement for anything like that, and that justify sexual immoralities or fornication, kind of?
No, there's no medical condition that I know of that even makes sense to justify fornication or things like masturbation. In fact, there's a whole lot of medical conditions that are detrimental to people. Inflammation of the testicles from masturbation, because the bodily fluids don't flow properly, sexually transmitted diseases. And you need to know that some of these sexually transmitted diseases are permanent. They're still permanent. Medicine hasn't had a cure for a lot of these things, such as herpes, which is sores on the genitals, HIV. These things are treatable, and they make the consequences less. But they're constantly with you. In the incidence of herpes, it lives in the nerves, and then it comes out when stressful situations, or if you're compromised your immune system. So these things are still constantly with you. And other things like gonorrhea, infection of the men's genitalia, these things can cause scarring of the urethra where your urine passes, and is very painful to treat if it's not treated right away. You have scarring tissue, and then sometimes they have to use probes to keep that passageway open. Otherwise, you can't urinate. Things like syphilis, which can be passed on to your children, and things like syphilis can cause insanity still. And it's rare to see that, but it does happen still sometimes. So there's a whole host of things that are bad, that can potentially happen, that are bad. And there's virtually nothing that's good about it.
Thank you. If I clearly understand you, there is even more consequences, health dangers associated to them than what any other person will claim a benefit of it. Is that the case?
That is the case, and the people that are making these claims, you can twist logic and you can stretch things until they're uh, you know stretch things to make things that are almost unbelievable. But if you look at any reasonable person would clearly recognize that living a biblical life, it has clear health advantages over any potential benefit, which I can't even think of. Um, and it's just again going back to that bio, psycho, and social model. All these things interact with each other, and there's no real evidence, anything at all, that there's any kind of benefit. But there's psychological, spiritual, and physical major detriments by living an unbiblical life.